to be fixing the parking brake on the Evo. So show you how to take the wheel off, which we've done that in some other videos, but I'll do it again. Then I'm going to show you how to take the rotor off, take your caliper off, and then how to take apart the parking brake and put it back together with the new hardware and the new shoes. So enough said about that. Let's get to it. All right, YouTube. Now, something I don't know if I've shown you before, but I figured I'd go ahead and show you before I jack up the back of the car. So if you see the circle here that I've got in the middle of the frame, that is a jack point on the rear diff back here, where you can actually jack up the whole back end of the car from one jack point. And also, when using this, make sure you're on a pretty level surface, because obviously jacking up the car at the center, if you're on an incline left or right, the car is going to want to fall that way. And then, of course, again, as usual, when you're jacking up a vehicle, make sure that you use your jack stands. So if you jack up by this point, once you have it up to height, make sure you go ahead and put your left and right jack stands on it. That way, if something was to bump into your car, it's not going to fall over off the jack. And that way, either way, it's not going to fall once you've got it up. Always practice safety. Now, on to the rest of the work. As usual, make sure you have your chock block under your wheel before you lift the car, because as we're going to be working on the parking brake, that's all that's going to be keeping your car from rolling. If you're on a relatively flat or not much of an incline, you can get away with using a 2x4 if you don't have an actual chock block. All right, I've got the car up. So the next thing you want to do is make sure to disengage your parking brake, because it's kind of hard to work on the parking brake when it's engaged, because you won't even be able to get the rotor off. All right, so today we're going to be using Power Stop Auto Specialty brake shoes, Centric Parts hardware for rebuilding this parking brake. So first thing we're going to do is check the shoes, make sure they're in good shape, make sure there's no damage to the hardware. The sibling shoe here, we need to also check the pin, make sure it's not loose, make sure it's seated like it should be. Check this one, that's good too. Again, we'll check this one. This one concerns me a little bit because the shoe's not exactly centered on there like it should be. We'll see if that really makes a difference once we get it in there. This comes with the washers that we're going to need for the install. These horseshoe washers are going to go onto these lips here during the install. You'll see that when we get to that step. So that's the shoes. Now we're going to look at the hardware. In our hardware pack, we're not going to open this plastic because it's a whole lot of little parts. I want to make sure we've got 2 of the blue springs, 1 of the tensioner spring that goes between the shoes, 2 of the adjusters, 2 of the yellow springs. I want to make sure that we've got, or actually 4 of the yellow springs, sorry. Make sure we've got 2 of these bolts, 4 of the red springs, 4 of the pins, and 4 of the caps. Then we've got our grease, which is going to be used for lubing both the adjusters as well as a couple spots on the backing plate for the parking brake. That covers all of our parts. Now let's get to the work. All right, so the first thing we've got to do is take the caliper off so that we can take the rotor off. And we're going to need a 17 mil for the bolt here that holds the caliper on. All right, so forgive the lighting. There we go, that's the top one, which I just got done breaking it free. And then here's the bottom one. So we'll get these out, then we can take the caliper off. All right, so we've got the caliper off. Now make sure you either tie up the caliper or you set it carefully somewhere that's not going to put tension on the brake line. So now that we've got that off, now depending on how long your rotor's been on here, you may need to take the rubber mallet and just break it loose. This one's pretty well loose here. We'll slide that off. Now while we've got this off, I'm going to go ahead and pull this plug here because we're going to need that in a minute. And also, when you set your rotor down, make sure that the braking surface does not touch anything hard, so you may want to set it on a blanket or something like that. Now, as you can see here, this is pretty dirty and rusted here. And this is a 2015. However, I live in Ohio where we have all this fun weather, snow, ice, you know, all the good stuff. Now, we're going to start to take this apart. Now, these springs, especially being a little older like this, can be challenging to get off of here. So this is the adjuster, and we're just trying to take all the tension out of it. So there we go. See, there's no gap left here. It's got a little bit of play to it. So now we're ready to get back to it. You can see here where I was talking about the tensioner spring that goes between the two shoes. This is the pin with the cap and the red springs. This is your yellow springs up here. And down here is where your blue spring's going to go. There's one off. Now I like to lay the springs down in the same order and position that they came off. Alright, so those are free. These, they actually make a special tool for that you can use, but I found that these type of pliers work just as well. So you seat it on either side, push. Well, there we go. So that's our yellow springs removed, the red springs and caps removed. Which now will let us just peel this off here like this. Now you can see right down here at the bottom, well, you can't see yet, you will in a second. So there's the adjuster. There's the old shoe, which has still got a decent amount of shoe material on it. Then that's your clip that goes up here between the shoes at the top. And this is what would be your blue spring here. And we can just pull these little pins out. And I like to put them back in like that just for the sake of keeping track of all my parts. Now this one can be a little trickier. I'll go ahead and show you why this one's a little trickier. So if you can see where I'm wiggling this right here, see that bar is kind of right in the way there. So if you turn it at an angle, then it falls right out. You have to remember when you're putting in the new one, you're going to run into that same spot right here, running into your arm. So you're going to have to come in at an angle to get that pin in. Alright, so when I was mentioning about where we're going to need to grease on a back plate on here, that was referring to these little nubs right here, which I don't know how clear they're going to be on camera, but when you're working on it, they'll be kind of obvious. They're standoffs, and that gives your shoe something to rub against without actually touching this plate or back here or interfering with your hub. So I'm going to get this cleaned up and ready to install the new hardware. and then I'll show you how to disconnect the brake component from your pads, and we'll get back into it. Alright, so I decided to go ahead and finish taking this apart before I do the cleaning. So you'll see this little horseshoe washer right here. That's the ones I was showing you that come with the kit. So we're going to have to get this part pried back open, because this is what actually disengages the brake lever from your pads. So you'll see here's the spring and the cable that come in, and what that'll do is that kind of pulls on them and makes them expand like this. So what we've got to do is get this retaining washer off, disconnect this, and then we'll be ready to clean it up. Alright, that's off. So now, there we go. Now that's off. Alright, so for cleaning this, just spray it down with some brake cleaner. Just be kind of liberal with this, because this is something you don't get into very often. Now, I like to go back and take some like 600 grit sandpaper and just kind of clean these off just a little bit, because that gets some of the rust off, gets any hard brake dust off of them. And then here, where your shoes butt up against, I mean, we're not trying to get this like perfect, shiny, back to brand new. Just trying to clean it up a little bit, help minimize friction. So here's all the parts laid out like they're going to go back on. We have the grease, which is going to go on the adjuster. You have this plate here with the blue spring on it. You have this shoe with the retaining pin and the yellow spring on it. Then this one has the tensioner spring that goes between the two shoes, the yellow spring, the other retaining pin / hinge, the horseshoe washer, and this washer you'll notice is curved. That is to allow it to add extra pressure onto the horseshoe washer and help hold that in place. There's all the parts. Now let's get them put back on. So I've showed you where everything is here. So first things first is getting the shoe reattached to this. Now, one of the things I like to do with this too is I like to add some of this lithium grease around the pin here to help it turn in here and to help prevent any possible corrosion on that. And it doesn't take much. Like, that's actually probably just a little too much. Now you can take some of this grease too, since we got a little too much to start with. Put some of that on each of these little spots here. Now we'll put this back together. And look at it, just slip right on. Get our washer on here. And this is the hardest part of this whole thing. Alright, that's on. And yeah, this whole thing can be a pain in the butt. Right, something that can help a little bit too is kind of pre-squeeze the spring a little bit. That takes some of the new tension out of it a little bit. I'll make it just a little easier to compress when you're compressing it with your hand here. Now remember, this is the cap that we have to get the pin in at an angle. We've got this piece back in. This little plate, one that comes on here, you're going to have to reuse it. One of those doesn't come with the kit, which is kind of surprising. So now for the fun part, getting this spring hooked onto here. trying to make sure that plate stays up there where it's supposed to while you're doing it. All right, that one's on. Now, for the last one. Those are on. When doing this, remember, left, right, putting it back on, taking it off, it's right, left for these top two springs. Your plate here kind of has a little indentation here and here. That's supposed to go with the indent facing the car, so the little tab's up. And your triangle is supposed to be large side to the top, pointed to the bottom. So that's the initial putting it in, then kind of try to make sure it's basically centered so that your wheel will go back on without any problems. Now, where I had to spin it out for getting everything put together on the bottom, you'll need to make sure you turn that all the way down to where the gap is closed, like it was when we took it off. All right, so we're getting ready to put the rotor back on. So you'll take your pliers, get hold of this rubber plug, kind of wiggle, and it'll come right out. So something else I like to do while I've got this off, got my rag here. I like to just give this a somewhat liberal, just quick clean with the brake cleaner. Sorry, I'm going to be facing away from the camera here for a second. Alright, now we're going to go back where you can see there's the inside. So, not as dirty as it could have been. Alright, so here comes an important part. So, where we pulled out that plug, well, we'll get to it in a second. So, get this back on. Now, we need to turn the wheel so that you can see the adjuster through this hole. Now we've got this to where we can see the adjuster through the hole here, almost spot on dead centered. Now we can adjust it. Now we're going to adjust it. So take your flathead screwdriver and start turning. So turning up will loosen it, turning down will tighten it, and we're wanting to tighten it. Now, even if you're not doing a full replace, This is something that's not bad to do anyway, just to make sure that your parking brake, e-brake is adjusted properly. Alright, now I got a little too tight. Once you've got it to where it's basically just touching this, which should be about where it's at right now, it's just touching it. You want to back it off about 5 or 6 clicks, and then you're set. Done with that, put your plug back in. Now we need to put the caliper back on. There we go. Getting that top one lined up. Finger tighten the bottom one because it's easier to sometimes see and get it lined up. And then the top one will fall right in place. Now another tip, when you're putting your caliper back on, always make sure you've got both bolts started before you try to tighten them up. And vice versa. Make sure you've got them both, when you're taking it off, make sure they're both broken loose before you back it all the way out. Because if you take out the top one completely, and then you got a wrench on the bottom one, sometimes when you break it free, this whole thing will flip down. And if it hits you, it's not going to feel good. And the reverse is true when you're putting it back on. Go ahead and at least have the bottom one started before you tighten up the top one. Because when you tighten it, this whole thing can flip up. And again, it can hurt you, or you could damage the part. Calipers aren't cheap. So that's the tip of the day on dealing with those. Get them snugged up. Oh. Then you can come back with your torque wrench and make sure you get it to spec. So today we changed out the parking brake hardware and the parking brake shoes. I showed you how to take everything apart, showed you how to put it all back together. Notes is when you're putting the caliper back on, make sure you torque the bolts to spec. When you put your wheel back on, make sure you torque your lugs back up to spec. The primary difference between the driver's side, which I showed you, and then the passenger side, which I did off camera, is make sure that your blue spring is still facing forward, same as this side. And where on this side, your rear spring goes on top and the forward spring goes in the back of the two top yellow springs. On the passenger side, it's going to be the opposite of that. It's a matter of having patience, and you can do it as I showed you without having any of the specialty tools. It'll take a little bit longer, but you can still get it done. So that's all I've got for today. Thank you. Hope this was helpful. I'll put a link down below to Rock Auto where I got the parts from, as well as the list of all the parts you need to do this and all of the tools you need to do this. Take care and have a great day. Also, don't forget to hit the like button down below and let us know what you thought of this video. And please hit the subscribe, help us grow this channel. And don't forget to hit the bell notification over here to stay up to date on our latest videos that we're releasing. Thank you. Have a great day.